Coming up, we got some juicy coaching rumors and some red-hot playoff talk. It's all on the way next, right here on SEC Country Live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to SEC Country Live. I'm Brandon Adams. Happy to have you with us here today. A lot to get into, including, I say, the latest twists and turns and some of the most interesting coaching chatter we've seen. Obviously, that coaching carousel spins a lot sooner now than it would have in the past. And let's begin with some of that right now. And the best that I can tell, that the latest rumor that would potentially connect Oklahoma coach Lincoln Riley to the coaching opening at LSU would seem to stem from a few days ago when, we're in like flight tracker season. You have these private planes that leave from one spot to the other. When they go from a very recognizable town to another very recognizable town, it becomes very easy for folks to start connecting dots there on that. And there was a plane that recently left from Norman, Oklahoma to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. It doesn't take much to get the college football rumor mill swirling on that of, maybe this is Lincoln Riley going to LSU. Maybe he's talking to the folks down there. And obviously there's been a lot of chatter about that throughout the media here as well. And it's been so much so that you've even had relatively sizable, media personalities, those with followings, talking about this. And some of this has even led to a little bit of confusion here and there. Let me start with this. Tom Luginbill is a guy that you see on ESPN TV and doing radio broadcasts, kind of a recruiting guy, but he also spouts opinions about other things there as well. And I guess this was to be honest with you, I'm not sure if the genesis for this particular comment was on Twitter or where, but some of the accounts caught wind of the fact that Luginbill had put a pretty big statement out there that maybe Lincoln Riley truly would leave Oklahoma, maybe he truly would leave for LSU, that this was going to graduate beyond just being a rumor. And this was going to actually become a report that had some substance to it. Let me show you this on Twitter. I guess this is Unnecessary Roughness that tweets this out. I'm not even really sure what that is. But Unnecessary Roughness tweets out, "There's something going on at Oklahoma right now." That's the quote from Tom Luginbill. And I would not be surprised one bit if the next LSU coach is Lincoln Riley. That's Tom Luginbill saying that. That's the kind of weighty words that get a lot of attention. It also has the ring of being something beyond just sort of spitballing ideas here. Hey, we're just sort of workshopping some takes. That seems to kind of graduate beyond all of that. It almost sounds like Luginbill is kind of really, planting his flag on the idea that Riley would leave and go to LSU. Now, maybe he will, maybe he won't, but apparently in the aftermath of Luginbill saying that, whenever he did, there's been a little bit of an attempt to walk some of this back. There's been a little bit of an attempt to go back and say, maybe that's not quite what I meant. Let me show you a little exchange here that Luginbill later had on Twitter about all this. So you got this guy named Boomer Nopton on Twitter. That's 7878 Josh. So you following this so far? So Boomer Nopton weighs in to say, so Tom has no info, hence the quote, "I would not be surprised." Does LSU want a coach that allows the locker room at Oklahoma to get divided by starting the quarterback, the more talented player? He says if Tom had any real info, he would simply state what's going on so the media can engage. He says this is total clickbait. Now, here's where Tom Luginbill comes back on this. He says, listen, I never claimed to have any kind of inside information. This is just my own gut. He says it would make sense for both parties in my mind. So basically all Tom Luginbill has apparently done here is put a message board post out there, and it got kind of picked up and got turned into a little bit of almost like news. Like this almost became the kind of thing of, as said before, there's this moment where things graduate beyond just being the rumor mill type thing, and they become a little bit more substantial than that. Well, when Luginbill got involved, I think a lot of folks thought that's what this was going to become for Riley potentially leaving Oklahoma. But then Tom Luginbill goes back and basically backtracks on what he said there, and now you're kind of left to wonder, well, where does all this stand? It was interesting, though, that this has at least risen to the level. Now, it's at least real enough that Lincoln Riley's being asked about it. He was asked, hey, what do you do about all these rumors that are swirling around out there that you might take the LSU job? And this is the answer that Lincoln Riley gave to that. Here's the Oklahoma coach.
It's nothing to handle, it's pretty easy. I coach the University of Oklahoma football team, and you guys know me. You know how I feel about this place and this program. So we've all been down this road many times before. You guys know where I stand on that, and that hasn't changed.
So this is one of those moments where I hate to be this guy, but I kind of have to be this guy. Like, you hear Lincoln Riley say a lot right there, but like the one thing he definitely does not say is, and I am never leaving Oklahoma. You can handcuff me to my desk. I'm not going anywhere. You can pour cement around my shoes. I am not walking out of Norman, Oklahoma. He says the whole, hey, you guys know how I feel about stuff like this, and you know how I feel about Norman, Oklahoma. You know. And he goes down to kind of like low octave voice to really make the point more easily understood, more easily conveyed. But the one thing he stops short of saying is, I am definitely not leaving. I mean, you could compare this a little bit to like what a different coach said. You know, Jimbo Fisher, who has been largely connected to the LSU job many times over the years, and he's been asked about it, and some people kind of think that Jimbo is a little bit of a whatever, but when you compare what Lincoln Riley just said there to the recent emphatic denial on the part of Jimbo Fisher, I mean, I think you see some clear differences between the way in which some denials work. And by the way, this show is going to feature a lot of coaching denials about being interested in other jobs, so that's going to be a little bit of a theme today. But you just heard Lincoln Riley say there of, hey, you guys know how I feel about Norman, Oklahoma. There's not a lot of emotion there. There's not a lot of attempt to convince. It's just, hey, you know me, you know the situation. But compare that same thing to Jimbo Fisher being recently asked again, and he's been asked a bunch about the LSU job. Listen to how emphatic Jimbo tried to get when asked the same kind of question. I think you notice some clear differences here. This is Jimbo on the same topic.
Here's a bet. I've told everybody I'm staying here, and I've told everybody I plan on being the coach at A&M. All right. And everybody thinks all coaches lie. I know y'all don't believe us, all right? We're going to recruit maybe as good a class. Here's a bet. Because I said the other things. I plan on being, I love the AD, I love the president, I love the chancellor, I love living here, I love being in my ranch, I love the family loves it here, I love Kyle Field, I love the people, I love all that stuff, and that's obviously not good enough. And I get it. I'm not mad at you. I'm sorry, seriously. I read the reports and people come to me. I say, I don't want to hear. I'm not interested. We may recruit, number one, we're going to recruit an unbelievable class this year. Okay? So I'm either the dumbest human being on God's earth, okay, who's going to recruit all these guys to A&M so I can go across over here and go play against them, okay? If I did that, you ought to say, that's the dumbest human being. I don't want him to be my coach, okay? Guys, we're going to recruit a heck of a class. We're going to have special things here. We're building special things. They're investing in the program. They're investing in everything we got. We're building a culture.
So that's a denial. That, to me, is Jimbo Fisher. I would say, unless he just completely has no shame whatsoever, that's Jimbo removing all doubt that he's leaving A&M for LSU, and he gives you the most specific, tangible reason of all why he's not doing that. Because they're recruiting such a good class. They recently got the commitment from Walter Nolan. They're trending with Shamar Stewart. They're trending possibly with Evan Stewart. You can go up and down the list. There are big names that A&M is like the number one school on the board for right now. That's just kind of the way that it goes. And Jimbo Fisher says, when I've got all this recruiting momentum, why would I leave and go coach against these guys? I think that's true. Now, what Jimbo does not say, which is also true, is they wouldn't have that kind of recruiting momentum if the recruits truly thought Jimbo Fisher was leaving. And recruits, one way or another, are always the first to know what's really going on with the program. For the good, for the bad, they see under the hood. They see what's truly going on there. And A&M wouldn't have all that recruiting momentum if these recruits thought there was a real chance that Jimbo was leaving for LSU. So Jimbo, I think, in this particular case, is a man that should be taken at his word. Lincoln Riley, though, nowhere near as emphatic in his denial, which I would say leaves the door open for that. Now, Jeremy Pettis, one of our Facebook commenters, said that he believes that Lincoln Riley will leave Oklahoma once he realizes that he can't win a national championship there. And obviously, if national championship is your goal, then LSU is a pretty good place to be. The last three coaches to coach at LSU have all won national championships. However, I'm not quite so sure that the scenario is exactly the way that Jeremy Pettis describes it, because while there is a level of achievement that's probably easier to obtain outside of Oklahoma, just given the way that Oklahoma currently compares to the best programs in the sport, I'm not quite so sure a singular national title is really the thing that coaches value more than anything else. Because Ed Orgeron got one in 2019, but here we are, we're not even done with the 2021 season. Orgeron's already been fired. Like the juice that he got from winning the national championship didn't even last 2 years. So I would say that Lincoln Riley also notices that. He may notice how hard it is to win at Oklahoma, given the fact that proximity to elite players is a very big part of the championship equation. So Riley may notice that. But I'd say he also probably notices what happened with Ed Orgeron there as well. And as good as LSU was in 2019, you can make cases the greatest team of all time. Yet the cachet that came from being the head coach of that team, all of that evaporated almost instantly. I would say that Lincoln Riley probably noticed that there as well. If I had to guess what's going on with Riley, here's what I would guess, is that every coach wants to be wanted. And it's not just to get their ego stroked, although that's probably part of it. Some of this is also about keeping a restless fan base at bay, keeping them from getting a little too restless and maybe a little too in your business about what you haven't done. And while Oklahoma has made college football playoff appearances and they produce Heisman Trophy winners, go back and look at the legacy of the coaches prior to Riley at OU. Bob Stoops won a national championship. Barry Switzer, national championship coach, one of the all-time greats. Bud Wilkinson prior to that, you're going to go back to the distant past. That's a guy that once won 47 consecutive games. This is as storied a program as there is. So Lincoln Riley, based on historic expectations for Oklahoma, is actually underperforming right now. Deep down, Riley has to know that, even if they're in the top 10 every year, they're always winning the Big 12, and they've been frequently in the college football playoff. He's got to know that without the national championship, he's not quite what previous Oklahoma coaches have been. Now, maybe he can do something about that. Maybe he can't. But he can at least improve his quality of life by reminding Oklahoma fans of, hey, you may think you're going to get tired of me eventually, but you just better be careful I don't get tired of you because I can go take this LSU job. Ultimately, I kind of have a sense that Lincoln Riley probably doesn't have the guts to go to LSU because it's just a harder job. It may be easier to win, but it's the kind of thing where you better win big because of how easy the chance of winning is viewed. And frankly, I just don't know that Lincoln Riley's cut out for that. I mean, I think with Oklahoma and Texas both eventually coming into the Big 12, assuming Riley stays at Oklahoma when they do eventually arrive in the SEC, I think with those two programs leaving the Big 12 to come to the SEC, I think there's just going to be a lot of growing pains. And Oklahoma's a good team, and Riley's a good coach. I mean, Riley is as I said before, he's a fixture in the college football playoff. He's a sharp offensive mind. We understand all of that. But there are just some obvious necessities when it comes to college football and coaching at the highest level in the sport right now. You are expected to win. And just making the playoff and beating up on a bunch of patsies in a pillow soft league like the Big 12 is just simply not going to be enough. So is Riley willing to flirt with this job? I believe that he probably is. But ultimately, does he take this job? I don't quite think he's got enough bass in his voice to handle what goes on down there in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So we'll keep our eye on all that. It's great to have you with us here on SEC Country Live here today. We'll do more coaching carousel stuff in a moment. But for now, let me pause and go to something different, which is the current state of the college football playoff. Georgia was number one in the college football playoff rankings last night, and there is no surprise about that. At this point in time, there is very little debate. This is a team that's essentially running away with the field here right now. Doesn't mean they can't be beaten. Doesn't mean they wouldn't be beaten in the SEC championship. But no one's come close to beating Georgia since week one of the regular season. And so you're left to move beyond that for any subject of interest or intrigue. And for right now, the interest and intrigue belongs with the Alabama Crimson Tide. Number two in the college football playoff top 25 again this past week. Perhaps no surprise. But the lingering discussion and debate that exists out there is whether Alabama, if it were to lose again in the SEC championship game, would have an opportunity that we saw Notre Dame take advantage of last season, which was losing in the conference title game, but also going on to make the college football playoff, or like Alabama did in 2017 when it also made the college football playoff as a non-SEC champion. But this scenario would be a little bit different. This would be a two-loss team, and we've not had a two-loss team make the college football playoff before. Could Alabama do that? Well, there was an interesting discussion and debate on that last night on ESPN television involving Kirk Herbstreit, and the guy that's going to make the most emphatic point here in a moment is going to be analyst Joey Galloway. So listen to Pollock's going to ask Herbstreit a question. Herbstreit's going to quickly give his thoughts on Alabama. I edited out a part where they talked about Cincinnati because who really cares about Cincinnati? And then you're going to hear Joey Galloway come in making his point about Alabama. I find this to be pretty interesting, especially the part from Joey. So this is ESPN TV from last night.
If Alabama lost to Georgia, you'd still think they'd have a chance to be over Cincinnati?
No, I think Alabama's out.
I don't understand the thinking in this era. In past eras, I get it. In this era, if Alabama sit at number 2, goes on to play Georgia close, and we hadn't seen one team come close to Georgia, If they should happen to lose in a close game, you then tell me because they have 2 losses, that means Cincinnati's a better ball club than them. To me, it proves that Alabama's the second best team in the country if they play Georgia close at the end, because nobody has been able to stay close to them.
A lot of you know that I'm a Georgia fan, and so whatever I'm about to argue is certainly not coming from a pro-Alabama place. But I think that Joey Galloway is, for the most part, right there. I think that Alabama, both factually, is still a part of the college football playoff discussion, even if it loses to Georgia in the SEC championship game. And by the way, Alabama still has to qualify for that SEC championship game. As of yet, Alabama hasn't quite done that. But assuming it does, then I do think even with a loss in the SEC title game, Alabama could still make the college football playoff. And as Joey Galloway points out, if they were to lose close to Georgia, that would essentially be the only proof that I would need that Alabama truly is the second best team in the country. Now, if you're a Georgia fan, and I do hear from a lot of Georgia fans on this each and every day, there's at least some thought of, well, is it really fair that Georgia might have to beat Alabama twice? This is unfortunately just the path that Georgia has in front of it. Georgia's been clearly the best team in the country this year, but I would say just as clearly the road to a national championship still goes through Tuscaloosa, figuratively speaking, still goes through Alabama. Maybe for Georgia, it goes through Alabama. You circle back around, you have to go back through Alabama again. So Kirk Herbstreit in this instance, I believe, is wrong. The notion that, well, yeah, Alabama loses, they're out. I don't think it's quite that simple at all. I think that Joey Galloway comes closer to getting this one right. Now, what some Georgia fans have asked me is, and I think this is a very fair question, well, what if Georgia wins by 2 touchdowns? Well, at that point in time, I do believe it would be easier to eliminate Alabama, which could lead, and if you want to kind of game this out for a moment, think about this, that could lead to a scenario later on where if you're Georgia, let's say you're up 7 with 7 minutes to go in the fourth quarter against Alabama in the SEC title game. That might be normally a situation where you're trying to figure out what you can do just to kind of salt away the game, salt away your lead, and play in the SEC championship. But if you knew that you were going to emerge from this hard-fought game, potentially needing to fight Alabama again, all of a sudden are you potentially now a little bit more motivated to maybe tack on an extra score in the hopes that you can do something from a margin of victory standpoint that now would dissuade the committee from putting Alabama back in the college football playoff? You might risk losing the game, but Georgia would be 12-0. Maybe Georgia's chance of making the college football playoff, if it were to lose close in the SEC title game, maybe their chance of making the playoff are still great enough that it's worth the risk. That's probably not how I would do this. I would probably take the win that I could get and deal with the college football playoff once I got there. But admittedly, that's the kind of thing I think you're forced to think about right now with the committee considering things in a unique type of year, that if you could do something to eliminate Alabama, beat them bad enough so it's not even a question for the committee, then you might have the obligation to do right by yourself by doing just that. So those are a couple of my thoughts about big things here around college football right now. The rumors about the LSU job, the current state of the college football playoff race with Alabama still needing to beat Arkansas and Auburn to win the SEC West and be a part of that come the first Saturday in December. And obviously here on SEC Country Live, we'll have a lot of chatter for you as we get ready for all of that. So why don't we do this? We'll get back to more topics here in a moment. We did have a special guest that was slated to join us, but he's apparently been held up from a scheduling standpoint, so we won't be able to talk to him today. So let's get ready to get your comments, and we'll do that. Let me first of all remind you about my friends at Merriweather and Tharp, though. They're your source for Georgia divorce. You can find them online, theatlantadivorceteam.com. Now, you hear me say that, you're going to say, well, B.A., I don't live in Atlanta. Here's the great news about Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. They can also be your source for divorce all across SEC country. So if you're in Alabama or the Carolinas or Mississippi, Louisiana, Florida, Texas, wherever you're watching SEC Country Live right now, Merriweather and Tharp can help explain everything that you need to understand about the divorce process for where you are in your state, how the law in your state impacts you, because it's a little bit different everywhere you go. That's why you want to understand how the law works to your advantage and what you need to know about that. That's what Merriweather and Tharp can provide for you. They've been through this thousands of times. That institutional knowledge they have gained through all of that, they're willing to put that to work for you. So set up a free initial consultation with them. Just ask them your questions. You've got questions. They've got answers when it comes to the divorce process, and they can walk you through all of it. And my invitation to you is put them to the test. Have that conversation with them. Tell them your situation, because obviously everybody's situation is kind of specific to them. And not only will they give you facts to help you better understand your situation, honestly, they're just going to listen to you with some sympathy and encouragement. They're just going to help you understand how you can be set up for more success in the next season of your life. And boy, that's a great gift to be able to give someone. That's what Meriwether and Tharp can do for you. Online, the AtlantaDivorceTeam.com. All right, let's get some comments here. Facebook and YouTube, and we'll get ready to get some more news in coming up after that. Marvin Roach talking about delusional Alabama fans here in the comment section. Kyle Cummings checking in. He's sharing his thoughts. Larry Goldberg says, do you think the SEC refs will call the game with an Alabama tilt? I don't know if that's the SEC title game against Georgia. I don't know. Maybe thinking they want Alabama in the game. Obviously, SEC fans have been saying this for a while, but the truth is, and this is where I think I can hopefully be fair and objective, is that Alabama fans have complained about the officiating enough. Obviously, Georgia fans have done that there as well. There is no shortage when it comes to complaining about the officiating, whether you be a Georgia fan, an Alabama fan, or really kind of anything else there in that regard. I got kind of tangled up my cord there for a second. All right, let's get some more comments. Jeremy Pettison here stirring things up, quite like usual. Kevin Cook says, it is quite that simple, BA. I don't care what the margin of victory is, just wants to beat Alabama. And obviously a lot of Georgia fans would very much feel the same way. Joey Baker feeling good about the Crimson Tide. Boy, a bunch of Alabama fans in here. Kevin Cook also says he doesn't think Bama's going to get in with 2 losses. We shall see about that. Steve Rogers checks in to say that Bama's going to have hands full Saturday. Worry about that. He's feeling pretty good about Sam Pittman and those Arkansas Razorbacks. And listen, I know we have a lot of Arkansas fans that tune in and watch us each and every day, and I think there is a lot to feel good about what Pittman's been able to do there. And could they give a close game to Alabama? Maybe they could. It'd actually be an interesting comparison because we saw Georgia handle Arkansas very easily a few weeks ago. How does Alabama in its own stadium handle Arkansas this upcoming Saturday? That could make for a pretty interesting comparison. Antonio Freeman says 2 SEC teams, the national championship this year. Maybe thinking back to what happened there in 2017, but obviously for Georgia fans, they hope that works out differently. Nick Stitt checks in to say that he thinks that Lincoln Riley might be a better fit at a place like USC. It's actually a very fair point. I think that Riley would play well out there. It's the kind of place where you don't quite have – you're expected to win, of course, but you don't have quite the same pressure cooker that you have here. I think culturally Riley's probably a better fit out west than he is here in the SEC. There's a lot of stuff about Riley culturally that I'm just not quite so sure really fits too well with the SEC. And if he's at Oklahoma when it comes to the SEC, I think he's going to have some problems. And Jerry Popham checks in to say, he's having some fun. He calls the rest of these SEC fans heathens, so he's having a good time with all of that. Jonathan Flippo on the subject of coaches denying interest in other jobs. He said, Tommy Tuberville said the same thing at Ole Miss. Dan Mullen said the same thing at Mississippi State. And as Jonathan points out, on and on you could go with all of that. Tracy Robbins checks in with the Hail State. Donald Rumney gives you a go Dogs. Kyle Cummings gives you some celebration there for UGA. So a lot of folks checking in there on that front. We'll also do some YouTube comments here coming up in just a moment. Before that, though, I want to check in on the Florida Gators. We'll do our all-points bulletin here and go around some of the spots in the SEC and get some news and information. We'll also give you updates on the big games for the upcoming weekend from a point spread standpoint. We'll do that here coming up in just a moment. Before that, though, one of the most talked about games this past weekend was Florida in an unexpected, surprising shootout against Samford, where the Bulldogs scored more than 40 points against Florida in the first half. It was actually a program record for points allowed in a half, and the fact that it came against a team like Samford certainly was eye-opening for many Florida fans. What was also eye-opening for a lot of other people as well was the wild celebration that took place in the Florida locker room after Florida eventually eked out and finally pulled away a little bit with a win against Samford last week. I think some folks were surprised to see how happy the Gators were in a game that most SEC observers thought was pretty embarrassing for Florida. Let me show you some of this on the screen. This is Florida celebrating in the locker room from Saturday. A lot of you have seen this video by now, but just to give you some context what we're talking about, this is a Florida team that struggled and fought all day against Samford after losing in embarrassing fashion to South Carolina. Obviously what happened in the rivalry game against Georgia before that. It's a Gators team that's reeling right now, and a lot of folks would love to wonder, does Dan Mullen still have control over this team and this precious Gator standard that Mullen's always talking about? Do the Florida players even know what that even is, especially after Todd Grantham and John Hevesy were fired, 2 Florida assistants, Grantham being the defensive coordinator, almost scapegoated, if you will, for what had gone wrong for Florida. Yet the defense even played worse without Grantham this past Saturday than it had been playing with him there. And in the post-game press conference on Saturday, Dan Mullen seemed to be in a pretty good mood. The team itself had really celebrated, and credit to a reporter, I believe this is Edgar Thompson from the Orlando Sentinel, he really kind of pressed Mullen on, hey, is this win against Florida, the one we just saw the video of the Gators players celebrating, is this really a thing worth celebrating right now? And this is what Dan Mullen said in response to that. Take a listen.
Does it feel like, I don't want to say like a kind of a bad performance in some ways? I mean,
thank you, Trent Grimm from the Independent, right there.
No, but
I mean, that's a win.
I get it, Dan. I get it, Dan. But no team had ever scored even 42 points in the first half of.
Yeah, I don't think. I think though you look at that. I don't think. I don't be. They're a offensive football team, and they score points. They have some good players. So I don't think calling a win disappointing is disrespectful to the game and our players. I really do.
So the Trent Grimm thing. Now I'm not a watcher of this show. But the Trent Grimm thing there is from the Ted Lasso show that's on the Apple streaming service. That's when Mullen calls Edgar Thompson Trent Grimm. That's what he's referencing. I guess that's a reporter. Like I said, I know a lot of you watch Ted Lasso. I just don't. I'm not against the show. I haven't watched it. I just have not watched it. So that's a little bit of a pop cultural reference from Dan Mullen, which once again I think to some people is just going to come across as a little bit flippant, given the current state of the way that Florida's playing, that he's making this pop cultural reference, and this is the same guy that once dressed like Darth Vader during a press conference. It's like, I think there's an attempt by some to ask the question of, does Dan Mullen really get what's going on here? Does he get the fact that he's letting all of this slip away at Florida, that a year ago they were, like a year ago at this time, this is a team that was 6th in the college football playoff rankings. They were celebrating an SEC East win, and look at the erosion that's occurred for the program since then. The huge number of losses they've taken, some of them have come in embarrassing fashion, and Mullen's over here referencing Ted Lasso and celebrating a close win against Samford, shrugging off the idea they gave up 42 points in one half to the Bulldogs, and all of this has just left Florida fans pining for the days of obviously Urban Meyer or Steve Spurrier, or perhaps even Will Muschamp, given the way that things are going so bad right now. And then later on, a couple days after that, earlier this week, during Mullen's weekly press conference, he was asked to kind of make the comparison of what I just said a moment ago, how good it seemed like things were going for Florida last season compared to how rocky the road seems to have gotten right now. And for the most part, Mullen doesn't really want to make that comparison and really doesn't really offer up much in the way of substantive reasons for why the Gators have struggled so much this year. Once again, you wonder, does Mullen realize just how much it appears that he's coaching for his job here at this moment with a road trip to Missouri looming on Saturday? More from Dan Mullen.
It might sound like coach talk, but every year is such a unique year with a unique team with unique circumstances that occur. Played a very different schedule this year with a very different team under very different circumstances. So, it's not like, oh, this happened. This year hasn't gone the way that we've wanted it to go, unfortunately. And there's multiple, you can point at a lot of different things of why that happened and different reasons with where we're at. But that's this year's team. And it's hard. I can't compare one year to the next because each team is so independent.
So he says, listen, I don't want to make any kind of comparison this year to what's happened in previous years, but here's the one thing I wonder if Dan Mullen recognizes. He would never talk about this publicly, but you kind of wonder, does he know this? Does he see this? That a shift has occurred around him. Go back to the beginning of last season. Dan Mullen, and admittedly I'm a Georgia fan, and admittedly as a Georgia fan, we believe that Georgia fans are Gator haters, so you can take all this with a grain of salt if you want to. I'll never try to pretend to be something I'm not with all of you. I'm not going to pretend to be objective journalist guy. That's not the thing that I do here. I'm going to be a real person with real feelings, real beliefs, and you can judge for yourself whether the point of view makes sense. I should also point out that I think a lot of Florida fans at this point in time actually agree with some of what I'm saying. It's almost like that meme that's out there, the worst person you know makes a good point on the internet. I think for some Florida fans, I've kind of become a version of that. The worst person they know because I'm a Georgia guy, but I'm actually arguing a lot of the points that they themselves are arguing when they get together, either in online communities or in person for tailgates or things like that. But have you noticed the shift that's occurred around Dan Mullen? Before last season, this was a media darling. This was a guy who was constantly praised for being what some people have called the best game planner in all of college football, the best play caller, the best, smartest offensive mind, quarterback whisperer. All of these things have been true and said about Dan Mullen at Florida. Yet, when was the last time you saw anyone in the national media come to his defense? And in a lot of ways, national media guys don't know as much about what's going on as those closely connected to a program do. Local media oftentimes knows what's going on with the national. They know what's going on with a program, with a coach, with a player. They're going to know more about that than the national media does. But here's the one thing that you can also kind of depend on the national media to do. For the most part, they don't back losers. For the most part, they hitch their wagon to opinions that are going to make them look smart. If they have reason to believe that that's no longer a wagon worth hitching to, then they'll run from it. They will unhitch and they'll move on to something else. I mean, have you noticed just how quickly and how profoundly folks have kind of unhitched from Dan Mullen and moved on? When was the last time you really saw anybody with a sizable following come to Mullen's defense? It's all quiet on that front right now. I think locally there have been a lot of folks around the Florida program that have had a problem with Mullen now for quite some time. He's never had a whole lot of local defenders. He's never had a whole lot of very vocal backers within that Gainesville community. But nationally, he's had plenty of folks who are like, oh, Dan Mullen's just so smart. But you don't really hear that being said anymore. The kind of thing that you might sometimes hear a prominent voice say, if these Florida fans are crazy, if they think they're ever going to get a better coach than Dan Mullen. No one's saying that right now. That it's gone very, very quiet around Dan. There's been a pretty big shift here. And it is not a given that Florida can win on the road at Missouri on Saturday or that it can finish off with a rivalry win against Florida State. That's not a given at all. And if Florida loses any of those two games, I think what is a given is that Dan Mullen will be fired. And I think, based on the conversations I'm having with Gators fans, most Florida fans will be pretty happy if that happens, especially given the embarrassing way in which Florida celebrated the win against Samford this past Saturday. I'm Brandon Adams. It's SEC Country Live. We'll get more of your comments coming up on YouTube in just a moment. Before that, though, I do want to give you an update on the other big games around the league here this weekend. Let's just quickly take a look at a lot of this from a point spread standpoint. A betting standpoint will give you a chance to make some money. Of course, our friends at BetUS provide all of that when you use the promo code SEC125 and sign up for a brand new account at BetUS.com. You're going to be a big winner before you even place and win your first bet. You're going to get 125% sign-up bonus. What that means is if you put money in your account, BetUS is going to put even more money in your account you do. So, for instance, if you put $100 in your account, BetUS is going to put $125 in your account. You're going to have $225 in your account. You literally will have more money from BetUS than you have from yourself. And that's money you can play with. That's money that you can win with. And that's money you can have a good time with from our friends at BetUS. That's how they've lasted so long. They've been around for 25 years. America's most beloved sports book. And you don't last that long unless you're taking good care of your players, doing right by them. And that's what BetUS is going to do for you. But it starts when you first get signed up. So go to BetUS.com, get signed up, use the promo code SEC125, and take advantage of the 125% initial deposit bonus. All right, let's dive through a few of these games. I'll give you quick thoughts on all of this. Georgia hosts Charleston Southern on Saturday. The number here for the number one team in the country, we're going to call it 54.5. The honest truth is this is not even an easy line to find. Commonly, it's not even really available, but if you can find it, that's about what you're going to find it on. I don't typically like big point spreads. Don't have a lot of feeling about Georgia here. I think Arkansas-Alabama is a very interesting game. And listen, I think from a gambling standpoint, you can kind of go either way on this. I guess the question you have to ask yourself is, at a certain point, does Alabama look like Alabama? They did not 2 weeks ago against LSU, but at a certain point, can they show why they are the number 2 team in the country? If they can't against Arkansas, they're probably not number 2 anymore. And for the Hogs, who I think have been a really good team thus far this season, posting a 7-3 record, you almost have to wonder, after 2 consecutive weeks of being in the college football playoff top 25, are they ready to hang a mission accomplished banner and maybe willing to go a little soft here this week? Just knowing that, last time facing a big road test at a place like Georgia, didn't handle it too well, went into a hard-fought game against Ole Miss the week after that. At a certain point, has Arkansas done all it can do for this season? Fair to wonder. I told you before about Florida going on the road as an 8.5-point favorite against Missouri. I get why Missouri's a big dog at home. This is a Missouri team that also stood up and beat South Carolina straight up last week. right now Florida's not good enough to be favored 8.5 points against anybody. So from that standpoint, I don't mind going Missouri on that. Another big favorite on the road is Auburn on Saturday. You know that it's not Bo Nix anymore. He's out for the season. It's TJ Finley stepping in. I could see Finley playing well. Finley played well for his old team LSU against South Carolina last season. I think Auburn eventually wins this game, but 7.5 is just too many points. If you have a chance to tease this one down, by the way, below that, key numbers are 7 and 3. A teaser here gets you below. If you want to take Auburn by a small number, think about teasing this thing down below that 3. There could be some value there on that if you can find another game to pair it with. But the point here is that while I expect Auburn to win, I think that's too many points to give the Gamecocks here, maybe bouncing back after a poor road performance a week ago. Ole Miss, obviously fresh off a big win against Texas A&M, but 36.5 points is just too much for me against anybody. Vanderbilt's actually covered in 2 straight games and in 3 of its last 4. So I'll take the Commodores plus the 36.5. Outside the SEC, Michigan State, Ohio State. Listen, I think this is a tough one to pick all the way around. Is it a square favorite? Is it a square dog? Similar question about Alabama in terms of, can Alabama look like a top 4 team with how it handles against Arkansas? That's the question there for Ohio State, minus the 19. I'll take a flyer to say yes. I like Oregon on the road, plus the 3 against Utah. I think this is a very tough stadium to be in, and Oregon's had a hard time holding on to its status as a playoff contender late in the season before. But if this is close, every call is going to go Oregon's way. So I'll take the Ducks, and I'll also take a flyer on Clemson minus the 4.5. With maybe one more opportunity for that Tigers team to play well before the season is done. Those are your BetUS best bets. Find them online, betus.com. Promo code SEC125 for 125% sign-up bonus. Take advantage of that offer today as we head towards real crunch time in the college football season. This is a great time to get your account set up at BetUS. So betus.com for more on that. All right, we're going to talk about Shane Beamer here in a moment. Another coach forced to refute coaching rumors. We'll talk about that with Beamer here in a little bit. Let's take a few more comments before we get there. Mark Morris arguing against a 2-loss Alabama making the college football playoff. I guess here's the question, though, that you have to be kind of left to wonder about. So if Bama doesn't get in, who is? I don't believe Cincinnati's a playoff team, although they did not drop in the rankings last night. Thought they might. I think there are still multiple Big Ten teams that are competing, and much the same way there's a possibility that 2 SEC teams can make it, I still think there's a chance that 2 Big Ten teams could make it there as well. I think that's at least a possibility between Ohio State, Michigan, and Michigan State. They are still part of that conversation. I think Oklahoma's been all but eliminated. They are now below the previous low water mark for a team that still made the college football playoff. I believe we've had a number 9 team this late in the season still make the playoff. Oklahoma's below that right now. I think the ACC's all but eliminated. I think that Notre Dame is playing right now like you might think of a playoff team playing. They're playing as well as the previous Notre Dame teams that have made the college football playoff. But as long as they're 11-1, as long as Cincinnati's undefeated, Cincinnati having beaten Notre Dame, it becomes very hard to argue for how the Fighting Irish leaps over Cincinnati there because of all that. Not saying it can happen. In fact, I think it might happen. But it's hard to do that. So Notre Dame right now would seem to have a tough ticket to the playoff. Oregon stumbled before. They could possibly do that again. So part of the issue here for how you exclude Alabama if it loses twice is, well, who do you exclude them in favor of? Because some of those other teams have to build their own case to the playoff. And as it stands right now, there's not a clear path necessarily for a lot of those teams. Let's see what else. Mark Morris wanted to clarify his point about why Alabama doesn't get in. Tennille Calvino also joining in the conversation. Always great to see. Tennille also points out that a 2-loss Georgia team didn't make it in 2018. That's exactly right. And Georgia obviously played Alabama down to the wire. And you can make a case that Georgia was one of the 4 most deserving teams there in 2018, but Georgia just wasn't going to get that nod. And here's where Georgia fans, I think, are going to get frustrated, but it's true, is that I do believe the committee would be more gracious in its evaluation of Alabama than it would have been in Georgia in 2018, simply because Alabama is the reigning national champion. And Bama's also won, a hefty number of national championships. I just think they'd be graded on a kinder curve than I think Georgia would be under the same situations. Jay Shipes on the subject of Florida Athletic Director Scott Strickland. I mean, here's the other thing about the Mullen dynamic right now. I do believe that Strickland wants to prove he's his own man. Strickland, as Jay points out in the comments section, much like Mullen, came over from Mississippi State. But at a certain point in time, your loyalty is not to your old friend, the guy you used to work with, and in Mullen's case, work for. Your loyalty is to yourself. It's your own career ambitions. And with Florida trying to play a money game now that's different than it's ever played before, Florida's always been one of the more frugal programs in the SEC, but now they're joining the spending race. Now they're trying to build facilities, and they're pumping their big donors for the money required to build those buildings. And those donors want some attention for the money that they're giving, and they want some assurances that they're investing in a program that's going to win. And Strickland knows it's his hide that's on the line with those donors if he doesn't have good stewardship over the football program that he's managing as athletic director. So I think you may see in the time to come a little bit of an attempt by Strickland to distance himself from Mullen, to show that these aren't two guys that kind of came from the lower rung of the SEC tied to the hip together. That Strickland wants to be his own man, and he wants to manage the situation at Florida. And Mullen may be having trouble getting the stench of Mississippi State off him now being at Florida. But in the case of Scott Strickland, he wants to show you that he's all grown up. He's not, with all due respect to Starkville, he's not on this low-rung program anymore. He's at a place that can win at the highest level, and he belongs there. He's not an imposter pretending to be a major player in the SEC. He's actually arrived at that, whereas Dan Mullen right now has folks questioning if that's what he really is. Rob D, I think, talking about the SEC championship game. And by the way, you better believe we're going to talk a bunch about this in the weeks to come. It's already started in our comment section here. He says it's going to be a great game, and Georgia scores to go up 24-10. Bama gets stopped. Then Georgia scores again. It's 31-10. Then Bama scores in what is a garbage time, but it makes the dog fans nervous, 31-17. So Rob D is literally giving you the entire scenario there. So a very interesting description there. Ryan Milton says, I'm just ready for a good SEC championship game. Obviously, after some of these lately haven't been maybe as close as they could have been, and maybe that's what we'll get here this upcoming year. Cousin Eddie says, Bama may or may not beat Georgia, but Vegas is going to have Georgia favored by at least 3, so we shall see. Yeah, if you want to look at some of the comparative spreads that have been out there, I think you see now that Vegas, BetUS, they probably view Georgia as about a 3-point favorite against Alabama, and that's recently changed. As recently as September, you had reason to believe, or I should say as recently as the end of October even, you had reason to believe that Bama was probably still about a field goal or so favored over Georgia. Go back and look at the way that Bama was favored on the road in Gainesville compared to the way that Georgia was favored in a neutral site against Florida. Bama was a 17-point favorite in Gainesville. Whereas, Bama was a 14-point favorite in Gainesville, which equates out to about a 17-point favorite on a neutral field. Are you following me on this? If you get 3 points for being the home team, then Bama being a 14-point favorite in Gainesville would have been a 17-point favorite on a neutral. Well, Georgia and Florida did play on a neutral at the end of October, and Georgia was a 14-point favorite there. So by comparison, that's giving about a 3-point edge to Alabama. But that's now flipped. Bama was a 25-point favorite at home against Tennessee. But you look at the way that Georgia was favored on the road at Tennessee, all of a sudden now you see a slight move in the direction of Georgia as a favorite over Alabama. That's within the last month alone. Maybe Georgia just starting to prove itself a little bit more. Maybe Alabama, some of the close calls for the Crimson Tide impacting this. But I think you have reason to believe now that in the last month, the point spread line for the SEC championship is kind of flipped. It's gone from Alabama being a small favorite to now Georgia being a small favorite on the basis of some of the comparative spreads. Rob D checking in. He gives you a damn right. JTW says money is great, BA, but one must recruit well to win. Mullen can't recruit, and that's exactly right. They're obviously hoping those big facilities bring in more recruits, but ultimately JTW, I think, is onto something here. That it's really the personality of the coaches, how comfortable, how authentic you are, how genuine you feel. That's what wins with recruits one way or another, and that's the kind of thing that Dan Mullen seems to have a hard time with. Antonio Freeman says y'all are bashing kids for celebration of a win in a crazy year. Yeah, I don't know that I'm bashing them for celebrating, but at a certain point, don't you have to have more pride than that? Don't you have to say, Antonio, that, hey, listen, I'm an SEC level player. This wasn't an SEC level performance. I mean, I think you kind of want to have that level of self-awareness. And listen, I don't bash kids. I really don't. But I think the issue here is that the Florida players are taking their cue from Dan Mullen. They are celebrating because Mullen himself seems to believe that was a win worth celebrating. And I'm not saying you have to apologize for winning a game. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is Florida's just simply supposed to be better than this. And if Mullen's not effectively communicating that message to players, then the program really is doomed. More comments here. David May says he thinks both of Bama's games are that are left are tough. Yeah, Arkansas is no pushover. I think it will be curious to see what TJ Finley looks like at South Carolina on Saturday as a preview of what Alabama will face in the Iron Bowl. Marvin Roach on the subject of Georgia saying beating Bama twice and Ohio State's going to be a good. Can you imagine that run to the national title? If it's Bama, Ohio State, Bama to win it, boy, what a proving ground that would be for Georgia if that's the case. Kevin Cheek checks in to say Arkansas and Auburn will not beat Bama, so Georgia will play Bama in the SEC championship in Atlanta. I mean, admittedly, I think that if Bo Nix were still healthy and playing for Auburn, the Iron Bowl would probably feel a little bit different. And also, I'm not a fan of either team, but in terms of the prestige, the panache of the Iron Bowl, the fact that Auburn couldn't take care of business last week against Mississippi State certainly takes some of the shine off that game. Chadrick Shane Pike checks in to say that Cincinnati plays no one. He says Cincinnati would get beat by Bama or Georgia by 2 touchdowns. And I think that's the issue that you have with Cincinnati right now. They've got the marquee win against Notre Dame. That's the best group of 5 team win that we have in the playoff era. UCF never had a win as good as that. I don't think Boise State has. I don't think any team from the group of 5 in the playoff era has a better win than Cincinnati going on the road and winning at Notre Dame. But the problem here is against the previous 3 opponents, all of which are kind of bottom 25 type teams, South Florida and Tulsa and Navy. This, unfortunately, is a Cincinnati team that's having a hard time distancing itself from American Athletic Conference competition. You got to be better than that against your own league foes in a year in which the AAC is just not as good as it has been. They do get a decent test on Saturday from SMU. That's a pretty good group of 5 team to be able to play, not ranked in the playoff top 25, but a team that's been pretty good all year long. So you can judge Cincinnati on Saturday against, or I think the game's Saturday, whenever it's, you can judge Cincinnati against better than they have been playing competition. Let's see if they raise their level of play against a better team on Saturday. But if it's close again, if they play another close game, at a certain point, don't you just have to give up on the idea of Cincinnati? Deontay Julian, one of our resident Florida fans, says Florida's not going to beat Missouri. We're not good enough to do that. So Deontay is disappointed in his team right now, kind of weighing in to say just that. Guy Cody Caldwell says, tell us how Bama does not win the West. Well, I mean, I think you're talking about Bama losing one of these next couple of games kind of brings that back into the forefront. That had A&M beaten Ole Miss last week and then won out, and then Auburn beaten Alabama, Alabama would have lost the West by virtue of a tiebreaker to A&M because of the head-to-head matchup. Now what you're potentially talking about is the door being open to chaos where you have multiple teams tied atop the SEC West. That is still a possibility. Marvin Roach says he doesn't think Bama will score more than 2 touchdowns against the Dogs' defense. Michael Hall says you're going to have 5 or 6 major head coaching jobs open. He says USC, LSU, Florida. What's the best job right now? For me, it's the LSU job. I think it's the best job that is available. I think it's the best job that could be available. When you look at the recent track record, last 3 coaches that coach at LSU have all won national championships. That's just the best job. I'll take the Florida job over the USC job, but I'll take the LSU job over the Florida job. And, obviously Florida's a very talent-rich state as well, but at this point you just have to say that Florida has been less than what we once thought it was for such a long time. You almost have to kind of wonder, well, what's going on down there that they can't seem to recapture the magic that Urban Meyer once had, that Steve Spurrier certainly once had before that. All right, 1 or 2 more comments. We're getting ready to roll on. Rob D says he thinks that Florida would have been better off with Sam Pittman than Dan Mullen. There's no doubt in my mind that Sam Pittman's doing a terrific job at Arkansas. He's got great assistants. That's a well-coached football team right now, and there is no denying that. All right, we're going to have a funny SEC LOL here in a moment. Speaking of Kirby Smart, he went viral this week, or at least something that Smart said a couple of weeks ago went viral, and I had my attempt to kind of clean this up to make this appropriate for airwaves, so we'll do that to wrap things up with our SEC LOL here in just a bit. Before that, though, we started today's show by talking about coaching rumors and Lincoln Riley potentially connected to LSU, the emphatic denial from Jimbo Fisher on that same issue, Dan Mullen potentially coaching for his job. Well, how about what's also going on in South Carolina right now, where suddenly Shane Beamer, at least in the context of the rumor mill, has emerged as a candidate for the Virginia Tech job. Obviously, many of you are aware that Virginia Tech recently parted ways with its coach Justin Fuente. And, of course, the legendary former coach at Virginia Tech is the father of Shane Beamer, the current South Carolina coach. It's Frank Beamer, who was with the Hokies for a long time and played for a national title in 1999 and won a lot of games there. Obviously became the architect of Beamer Ball and the great special teams, and he's just a beloved figure there in the Allegheny Mountains of the Western Virginia area. And a lot of folks wonder, well, does that mean that Shane Beamer might go on and replace, following his father's footsteps and take that job there at Virginia Tech? Well, Beamer gave a very emphatic answer about that this week, and it's a little bit of a longer clip, but I wanted to give the full context for just how much Beamer wants you to believe that he does not want to leave South Carolina. This is Shane on that topic.
Obviously, I love Virginia Tech. I moved there when I was 10 years old. I went to high school there. I went to college there. I coached there. My parents still live there. So I have special memories of my time in Blacksburg, and that'll always be, special to me. But this is where I want to be. When I said this was my dream job, I wasn't just saying that to make it sound cool in a press conference or to get the job. This is where my wife and I and my family want to be. We didn't put that sign up over there at Williams-Brice Stadium that said "Welcome Home" just because it was trendy in the slogan. This is home for me, and I want to be the head football coach here at South Carolina. I love working for Ray Tanner and Chance Miller. They are fantastic, and we have an amazing relationship. I love this state. I want to live in this state. I love this city. I want to live in this city. I told our team a couple weeks ago, my son Hunter, he's in second grade, I guess. I want him to graduate high school from here in Columbia, and this is where I want to be. We're just getting started. Recruiting is going amazingly well. There's a lot of energy about this program right now. There's a lot of excitement about this program right now. My goal is to bring an SEC championship here to Columbia, and we're just in the beginning stages of it.
So I think when you hear something like that, I think you're forced to decide, do I believe this or not? Do I find that believable? It's almost like you're in the jury box and you're hearing expert witness testimony. Do I find this to be credible? Do I find this to be believable? I got to tell you, maybe Beamer's snowing me, but I kind of find that to be believable. I take him at his word when he says that, because first of all, is Virginia Tech really a better job than South Carolina? Now you may say, well, it's won at a higher clip. They played for a national title. Obviously, South Carolina's not come close to doing that. I guess so, but that's also in the previous century that it even occurred, and you had to have Michael Vick to be able to do that. I know you got Lane Stadium, and you got the Inner Sandman. That's kind of a cool place to play, and the ACC is maybe a little bit easier track record. You got access to that. It's always, to me, it comes down to what is your pipeline towards recruiting. And for a long time, Virginia Tech had access to that Hampton Roads corridor, that coastal Tidewater, Virginia area. That's the way in which Virginia Tech has gotten its best players, that coastal Virginia region, pipeline there for that. And that's certainly what Shane Beamer would want to unlock if he took the Virginia Tech job. But ultimately, I think the things that Beamer says about South Carolina, this place does kind of feel home to him now. And I guess I'm going to believe him on that. And I guess I'm going to assume he's not taking the job. Now, he looks like a gigantic weasel after saying all that he said right there if he eventually goes and follows his dad and becomes the next head coach at Virginia Tech. He doesn't look too good after saying that if he does do that. But I think that he means those things when he says them. And it's obviously not easy to win in the SEC, and even in the SEC East, it can be a pretty tough thing. But when you see him connected to the South Carolina program, when you see how that's unfolding, I think for now, I sort of assume that Beamer might want to stick this out and might want to see how it plays out from here. Now, as I also said, I'm sure he doesn't mind having his name show up for another job because it's just the kind of thing that maybe makes South Carolina fans stop to appreciate him more as opposed to trying to accelerate the clock for when he's supposed to have great success. But for now, I guess I sort of assume that Beamer's probably staying at South Carolina. I'll take him at his word on that. And with that, we'll get ready to wrap up another edition of SEC Country Live. By the way, let me also say this before we do our SEC LOL. So I got a really cool message. Some of you saw this on Twitter. Our buddy Mike Johnson. Now, if you've been a longtime viewer of SEC Country Live, you know Mike from the original co-host on the show. He and I did the show each and every day. Mike was a All-American Alabama. He's a terrific analyst. He knows a lot about the SEC. Just got great opinions. And Mike's now a coach. Mike's working in the world of coaching, and he's making a big name for himself over there. And so he's just not able to do the show with us each and every day anymore. He's just too busy to do that. But he apparently is ready to make a triumphant return. So coming up, I believe in a couple of weeks, we're going to have Mike Johnson from Alabama back here. So for those of you who think I'm too hard on the Crimson Tide and don't give Bama enough love, we're going to get the big old Crimson man himself, Mike Johnson, here on the show, I think, again very soon. So that's going to be really fun. I think we're going to try to do that around the SEC championship game, I think. I think it should work out pretty well. So we'll talk some SEC football with one of the original hosts of SEC Country Live, Mike Johnson, the former Alabama All-American, again very soon. So tell your friends about that. For those who've been with us for a number of years, I know they love Mike. Let them know that Mike's coming up here back again on the show again really soon, and I'm really excited about that. So that's for the near future. For now, SEC OLOL. So there was a audio clip really, of Kirby Smart that went viral, of a very passionate, fiery speech getting his team ready at halftime against Florida a couple of weeks ago. Georgia goes on a big flurry to finish the half, and Kirby Smart wanted to keep that intensity up for the second half. Now, it's the kind of cool audio that I'd love to play for you, but it's also the kind of thing that if I played it unedited, my bosses would be very upset with me because this is a pretty profane video. Now, listen, I got no judgments whatsoever for a coach using language in the locker room. I've been in enough locker rooms to know how it sounds in a locker room like that. So how Kirby wants to talk to his players is his business. They don't seem to have any kind of problem with it either. They've heard that kind of thing before. But the context of a broadcast is far different than the context of a locker room. And so I got to have things kind of cleaned up and edited if I want to put that there on the show for you. But if I do the traditional edit thing, it's almost like just one long beep. I mean, the thing's so profane, it would just be beep, 30 seconds worth of the beep. And that doesn't make any sense. So I did this on Dog Nation Daily, my other show this morning. I was like, well, what can you do then? I said, well, let me see if I can go, like 80s, 90s style basic cable edited for TV movie. When you bring in the edit and you replace the curse words and you substitute something that can be said on air, maybe you get some of the context that way without having to endure the profanity for those who are offended by that kind of thing. So this is a portion of the leaked audio from Smart. A lot of you have heard this. If you haven't, it's worth seeking it out to find the full thing. But here is the edited version that I'm able to play for you in SEC Country Live, and see how you think I did on this.
You know what, guys?
Flipping. Flipping.
Here we do how we play. It's 0 to
Flipping.
0, and you make them never want to play again. Don't say
Stop.
they're undisciplined.
Behinds.
We are disciplined. Physically, I want to break them. I'm talking about
Flipping.
breaking
Gentlemen.
on defense and offense.
So I wish I could play the whole thing for you. Never will be quite free enough to do that. But nonetheless, that is a kind of made-for-TV edit-style version of that. A lot of flippins, a lot of behinds, gentlemen instead of the word that Kirby Smart used. And that is our SEC LOL for today. Thanks for being here on SEC Country Live. Hope you all have a great week. As I said before, we got special guests coming up soon. Supposed to have one today. That didn't quite work out. Sometimes it doesn't. But you know what? I'm at least here, and you're here, and that's enough for a show. So thanks for being here on SEC Country Live. We'll see you again next Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern Time, We will look forward to talking to you then on both Facebook and YouTube. See you then, everybody.